Hello, everyone, and welcome to the concluding episode of Dunuary.
Dunuary!
I'm your host, Garrett,
And I'm Kate.
and this is Binkhorsts and Blockbusters, and we're going to finish up Dunuary with Dune Part Two.
Yeah, what a long-awaited film. I think that one of the reasons we started this podcast was to talk about this film. So, we're about 8 months into the podcast now. So, yeah, we finally got to talk about this movie.
It it could have been earlier, but with the strikes and things, they pushed the date out, and I think the movie has a bit more influence on today's events than it would have at October.
That's true. Well, October it would have been very pertinent, but
R- right, but maybe not as much now, as it
yeah,
is now.
yeah.
And shout out to my friend Max, who told me that Dunuary has a much better sound to it than Dunetober. So
Oh, well, thanks,
thanks,
Matt.
Denny.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I like Tober personally, but January is cool too. So I'm glad we could bring you January, and hopefully in the future we will have a part three to have another January about.
Yes, as it stands, they want to make Messiah in a few years. So let's hope they do that.
Yeah, I think they will based on the, overwhelming success this has been so far.
Yes, it has been an incredible premiere. The opening weekend has just concluded, and it's been the biggest like box office weekend opening since Barbie last year. So they're doing great.
Yeah,
Since the strike and things like that, this is probably going to be one of the like bigger, high performing things of the year anyway. But since it's so amazing and there's so much word of mouth going around, I think it'll really dominate the 2024 cinema year.
that makes sense. Yeah.
But before we talk about Dune Part Two too much, I started a new show on television.
Yeah.
It's called Shogun. Our parents told us to watch this one. It is about samurai and the Shogun time in medieval Japan, where there were a bunch of trade and a contested throne and religious zealots dominating politics and commerce. It's a real like political intrigue type show. A
Cool.
lot of people are saying it's Game of Thrones,
Oh, wow.
and I don't really like that because I think Game of Thrones is that label gets put on a lot of things. I've done it. I want to stop doing it.
Yeah,
The
I mean, we can't just say every show that has political intrigue in the context of a medieval feudal system is Game of Thrones, because it's
Yeah,
not. It's 100% not.
the showrunner or creator said something along the lines of it's more similar to like your House of Cards, like something like that. It's not about the big wars and battles. Um, you can watch this now on Hulu or Disney Plus, I think, as well, because sometimes those have some overlap, all depending on your packages. Um, and I have to say, for a television show, this is one of the most beautiful and well lit things that you can watch as television.
Oh, wow. What a review.
Like, well, think about some of the even the biggest spectacles in in Game of Thrones, how you couldn't see anything at night. In one of the first episodes, there's like uh, uh, a little attack on a village, or on the palace, and it's dark. They use shadow excellently. They have like all the candlelit scenes and out in the moonlight. Like it's great. It's visually stunning. Uh, just a good show. I think the first 2 episodes are out, but it's I think gonna have like 8 or 10
Okay, cool. I didn't know if it was all streaming or if it was a
week
week.
by week.
Okay. Yeah, I need to check this out. This is definitely on my list. And I've been consuming a lot of podcasts about Japanese warfare in the past year. So this area is particularly intriguing to me, especially as a medieval person, medieval obsessed person. I don't even know what to call myself sometimes. Yeah, I definitely am interested in this show, and I look forward to seeing it. I do hear it's based on a book.
Yeah.
At least that's what Mom said. Though I don't think she was sure about the author's name, or there was a debate in the family chat over that.
It is based on a book. I
Cool.
don't remember who wrote it.
Yeah, I don't think it really matters.
No.
But yeah, I look forward to seeing this when I have some time.
And on Hulu, at least, there are subtitled, and then there's a version that's completely dubbed over. However, I really like the way Japanese sounds, so I like reading.
Okay. Yeah, I would be interested in seeing how they compare because I am a, listen to TV person while
Right.
I'm doing other things. But I mean, there are some exceptions. Like I definitely watched the subtitle version of Squid Game. So, and I do feel like it was better that way.
Yeah, no matter what, I think there's a lot of like tone and, you know, that sort of thing in the way any language speaks.
Hmm.
That really helps not only with the visual acting, but in understanding the meaning of the subtitles. Like you know.
Yeah.
But that's Shogun. Go check it out. So we've been doing Dunuary for a long time now. It's basically all we've been doing this year. Um, we've talked about Dune, Lawrence of Arabia, Beetlejuice, Tremors, Dune again, and a bit about Star Wars last week.
Yeah, and I mean, there's a few other movies that I have thought about, connections to Dune in the meantime, that I will bring up for January, next time we get a Dune movie. Um, but it all really was leading up to this release of this movie, and I know I talked about this, excuse me, at some point in our January podcasts where like the first time I saw 1984 Dune, I demanded that we get a remake because I think that it's the last movie we ever need to get a remake of. It's the last bit of content that that needed to have a movie, that needed it to be in visual form, and 1984's Dune did such a disservice to the story and was so upsetting. And if you have not listened to my rants and ravings about 1984 Dune, you should definitely check that out because it is entertaining. But I am so happy that we finally have a conclusion to the actual reimagining Dune in 2024 that uses 2024 technology and music and artistry, and it's not Jodorowsky's Dune, but nothing ever will be.
Yeah.
And I think that it is as good, if not as close to what I imagined it could be as I want.
Well, I think we should just get started talking about part two.
Yeah.
Um, if you haven't seen it, well, you're gonna hear a lot about it. I think we both agree it's phenomenal and worthy of all the praise it's getting.
Yeah. Yeah, so, and I think that because we are so entrenched in the Dune universe of Dunuary and such, this is going to have spoilers, and it's very hard to not have spoilers in like the plot and the books. So if you want to watch Dune Part Two before getting any spoilers, then come back later. But
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So that's your spoiler warning there. But yeah, keep listening if you want to hear what we think about Dune.
So let's start at the beginning. The film starts on Arrakis during an eclipse-like event, almost immediately after the first movie ends, where they're transporting the body of Janice back to the Siege, and who arrives but some floaty Harkonnens.
Yeah, the floaty Harkonnens was interesting. I enjoyed that. I thought that it was very interesting visually, and it this whole scene shows uh the Fremen doing what the Fremen do best, and that is killing Harkonnens.
I saw a like promotional image of this scene and the Harkonnens with their big guns in the black space suits, and I was like, this is going to be some serious artistry. Um, the opening whole eclipsed red dunes, fantastic. That was such a gripping start. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
and I like the moment that Paul and Jessica shared, where you know Paul's still not he's putting the back to the door. He still has stuff to learn about being a warrior.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, and that is a good way to reopen it, right after the other movie ends, and you know showing too, like I thought it was interesting how the Fremen just kind of like leave them to their own devices so that they can either be the bait or die or whatever. Like they
Yeah,
just particularly care about them. Um which is interesting because that does change quickly over the course of the movie.
I think it was like a test.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do like early in that scene, or after they've killed the Harkonnens, they're sucking all their water out, and they're like, "This isn't good for drinking, but we use it to cool machines." And I'm just like, "Yeah, these are the Harkonnens. They're pretty shit." But I think it goes further to my idea that everyone is bald and hairless from Giedi Prime because they all have cancer.
Yeah, or are doing other drugs beyond just spice, maybe some synthetic spice, which is an irony beyond ironies. Um,
We do get a scene of Paul and Lady Jessica actually like eating spice, and then you realize that like all the food they're going to be eating for the rest of the movie is laced with spice,
mhm.
which makes sense as it should have been for everyone in the Imperium already, like, or at least all the nobility. Like in the books, they talk about having spice all the time.
Yeah, but it's different on Arrakis, and they also mention that in the books how there it creates a spice dependency. So like once you start living on Arrakis and consuming the spice in the same amount, you can never go back. Like there is a dependency and addiction to it that they mention.
Hmm.
And that's one of the reasons why spice is so valuable.
Yeah, to not just the people on Arrakis, but to the Imperium.
Yeah. Yeah, because it's imported. And I mean, so spice, if you don't know, spice is important to three groups of people. The Spacing Guild that uses spice for their space travel, the Bene Gesserits that use the spice for their ceremonies, and the Great Mother ceremony, or Reverend Mother things, and then the Imperial nobles who are addicted to it
I
because
do
they can live a long time.
I do think it was interesting we got no hint of the Spacing Guild in this one.
I agree. That was interesting. I was looking forward to seeing how they would, kind of depict the Spacing Guild. There was a moment where you saw a bunch of people at a computer looking at like maps, and I thought maybe that was supposed to be the Spacing Guild because it was when the Harkonnens were landing on Arrakis again. But I actually think that was just Harkonnens on Arrakis looking at Arrakis.
Yeah, that was them doing things. And I found the computer there very strange.
Yeah.
But I think I don't think that's too much of a thinking machine, but it kind of is.
Yeah.
Uh, that took me out for a moment, but then when the Beast Raban just started bashing people around, I was like, ah, this doesn't matter.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah. Well, and I think that, is a map really a thinking machine? Because that's all that really was.
Uh, in the Butlerian Jihad, they got rid of calculators. I don't think a calculator is a thinking machine, but something that can visually display map information, project it. Yeah, I think that's kind of but I guess they had the projectors in for the books that Paul was reading in the first one.
Yeah. And then, there are Ixian devices that do go against the Butlerian Jihad too. So,
And the
Harkonnen-
Harkonnens aren't above that, so
yeah, yeah. I mean, they're bad guys. So. So before we go too far away, I wanted to talk about Dune as, I mean, Arrakis and the Dunes, and the original name for Arrakis, which we find out later is Dune, which is interesting, that they put that line in there. But the fascination with this barren landscape and these simple people and this very hardy life where so much of what your goals are about collecting water, feeding and preserving the tribe, and then the extra activities that you do are about killing the Harkonnens.
yeah.
And I think that that's such I mean, it's beautiful that they captured all this so well. um but I think that, like, psychologically, one of the reasons why we return to Dune over and over is the simplicity of these people in this place. I think that was one of the allures of Lawrence of Arabia.
Yeah, absolutely. Just the simple nomadic lifestyle.
Yeah, and they capture it so well. And I mean, Arrakis will always be both a character and a setting. I think that it is just so magical and so full. It is such a full place. Like the idea of having the dust storms surround the belt around the planet in order to give protection really to the people that live in the South, because the Harkonnens are too dumb to think that people could live below those storms.
Right.
But them being isolated does lead them to have some pretty strange ideas about the world.
Yeah, I think Princess Irulan says you can only survive down there with faith.
Hmm.
And I guess now is a good time to talk about, oh God, I went too far. Uh, now is a good time to talk about the Lisan Al Gaib, the voice of the outer world.
Yeah.
So most of the movie is about the journey of these characters. You
Mhm.
spend Dune Part One really establishing the world, establishing who some of these people are, and Dune Part Two puts them places and moves them around and changes them. And the most impactful of all of these characters is Paul Muad'Dib Atreides.
Yeah. Yeah, the journey he goes on is fascinating, and I think that in ways that I was really concerned that this movie would not get the assignment,
Right.
who Paul is and what Paul does, and his motivations and the good and badness of it. And I am very pleasantly surprised that they captured it correctly.
Yeah, I'm so glad they went full bore with the he has prescience, he can see into the future, and he starts to understand and unravel so many of his like visions, and he understands like if I go and confront all these religious zealots, it's going to end badly. There is no way to win, um, or to get out of this if I take that path. Um, there's a lot of like conflict in him in what he's doing. He, tries to abandon it and dissuade people from thinking he's the Messiah, but Stilgar's like, well, of course, that's what the Messiah would say. He's too humble. Um, which got a laugh out of my theater.
Yeah, my theater laughed a lot at a lot of Stilgar's lines, which I mean it was okay, but it did kind of take me out of the moment because I don't
Yeah.
think it was meant to be that funny. I think that it was maybe meant to produce a chuckle, but not a laugh.
The the first like 45 minutes to an hour is a much different tone than the rest of the movie. Um, there's there's like this emerging like love story between Johnny and Paul, like when they're dancing in the desert together, and Stilgar's used not necessarily as comic relief, but as like this um I and a little like comedic or tension. Um, like he warns Paul about like ghosts, and he's like, nah, those aren't real, but the sands talk to you. Like there's there's a lot to that first act that is just not preparing you for the wars to come.
Right, yeah. And a lot of the like Chani and the other Freeman making fun of Paul and for, his other outer worldly ways. Yeah, that's it's interesting. I'm not
I
sure I liked it, but I mean I also didn't not like it. Yeah.
I was skeptical because it made me think they're not going to go full jihad.
Yeah. Yeah, because how do you change these people's minds about Paul? And, the way that they do that is by him, mastering the sandworm and, drink.
Leading the raids on the spice vessels and
Yeah.
saving Johnny. And
Yeah,
okay.
his, combat ability is unmatched. His strategery and maneuvering is, spot on. And a lot of it does have to do with his prescience and that, but they don't overemphasize that. So that I thought was good. Like there wasn't a lot of inner monologue about like, oh, I can see the thing coming or something.
Yeah, it wasn't like in what the Robert Downey uh June Iron Man in Sherlock Holmes, where he's like having a fist fight and he like narrates the whole thing as it's going in slow motion. That would have taken it out too much, but that's what Paul sees. Like he sees the future of the conflicts he's in.
Yeah, and I think that with Paul, it's not like the Matrix either. I think he sees like flashes of possibility, especially at this point. And so like it's not like he sees the whole future, but he sees some of it. I
Yeah.
guess I would have liked to see that more, like chopping up his vision more so that we understood, the variable effect of prescient thought. Um yeah, and then later on in the movie, in the final battle there, I was disappointed that they didn't like talk about his prescient thought in that moment.
Yeah, but I think if and when Messiah comes out, it will be impossible not to talk about it.
Okay. Yeah.
I think in many ways, I think Dune Part One and Part Two offer a really excellent like intro to this world and story in a ways that just like remove some of the like more crazy stuff just because it doesn't have as big as impact as it does on the story to be mentionable. Like
Hmm.
I think having the spacing guild monster in this movie would have been a bad idea in either of these movies, but it's still a part of the world, like is shown in David Lynch's. um, I don't think some of those things fit in this telling. I don't think there's time. I don't think there's tone. I don't think there's a reason to. When they brought in to cast Princess Irulan, uh, Villeneuve told her like this isn't a huge role, but in it will be later. I think there's a lot of that of setting up characters to have their moments in the movie. Like you didn't need to set up Fade in the last movie, but you needed to set up Raban.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
And I think this is a good time to talk about what I think is one of the most visually striking parts of the whole movie. When we go to Giedi Prime.
Yeah, this was what an incredible set of scenes. And um I noticed, in the commercials that all the scenes with the Baron and Fade were in black and white, but I didn't realize what they were doing exactly.
Yes, so this is not just black and white. They used digital cameras to film in the infrared spectrum, which gives everything a much different texture. And
Mhm.
apparently, this is what Giedi Prime looks like all the time. Their sun does not emit UV light in the same way ours does. So you have light and dark, and that's it. Um, yeah,
Interesting. And that would explain why they're also pale too.
yeah, they wouldn't need any melanin in their skin to prevent like sunburn or whatever.
Hmm.
And I think it gives everything such a texture. Um, you know, eh, Everything like the stone looks like, more there. Everybody looks a bit more stoic. It's very strange. It's
Yeah,
very alien and otherworldly.
yes, absolutely. It's very otherworldly. It's very alieny. And I think that that really captures the thing that needed to be captured.
Yeah, so what's been going on with the Harkonnens over here? Uh, After the Sardaukar leave, the Beast Raban, he gets control of Arrakis again, and his goal is to like exterminate all the Fremens. And he fails at this quite badly because of all of Moab D's journeys to destroy all the spice harvesters and sabotage them. Uh, I think Dave Bautista, who plays Raban, does a phenomenal job of playing this hulking monster of a person that has so much emotion in them and fear and worry. It's incredible.
Yeah, yeah, and really is one of the few like emotional characters in the whole thing. Because, all of the women have this very Benny Gesserit, like we don't show our emotions, we don't have them, we're doing what our programming tells us to do, thing. And a lot of the Freemen don't have emotions because they're that's just part of their dealio. Um
Yeah,
and then
you don't give water to the dead.
Right, yeah, yeah. So you don't waste time on silly emotions, like we might. Um, but yeah, so the Beast Raban, he cuts, and we talked about this a lot with the Star Wars situation where, you know, Darth Vader is the leading killer of Imperial officers. Well, the Beast Raban is the leading killer of Harkonnen
Yeah.
officers.
Yeah, he does a lot of brutality to these guys, but then so does Fade, played by Elvis.
Yeah, so and I think that's interesting too, where we have this, like plans within plans, and the
Yes.
Baron knows that the Baron is setting up Raban to fail so that he can swoop in and put his favorite nephew in charge.
Yeah, so one of my favorite things in the Giedi Prime scenes is at the arena, Lady Fenring is there, and she's like watching all this play out, and she, immediately understands one of these Atreides guys wasn't drugged, so it'll be like a fair fight. And this is, the Baron's plan of, well, if this Atreides guy kills my nephew, I'll know he's too weak. But when
Yeah,
my nephew wins, I will know he can take on any Atreides that are remaining. He can defeat the Fremen. He'll be the valuable guy.
yeah.
And
Yeah, and what an interesting play, to pit your family against each other. I mean, the Baron knew that what the Emperor was doing to destroy the Atreides, and plans within plans, but also to pit your own house, people in your own house against each other. It's such a, sniveling, slimy dynamic.
yeah, speaking of slimy dynamics, the um the kiss between the two of them is apparently improvised, which is very creepy. Uh, I really like how they made the Harkonnens creepy again, because in the first movie it's really not that much, but the Baron just like kills the musical muses that are playing in his goo pools. Fade just has cannibal girlfriends. Like, it's weird.
Yeah, yeah, they really did a good job of depicting the Harkonnens as evil guys. So, and I think that then also, creates a good contrast between the Fremen and the Atreides who, for the bad things they do, they aren't doing those bad things. So,
Yeah,
levels
yeah.
of evil that we're talking about here. And it's part of the justification for what Paul does, in the idea that, like, oh, if I do these things, all of these people are going to die, this jihad's going to happen, I'm going to become a monster. But am I still better than these other monsters? Is it still better than, the alternative here? Like, maybe.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite parts of Dune is weighing the obviously evil over the evil that is to come.
Yeah. Yeah, which is something that, we have to think about in a lot of wars that we perpetrate and, are part of. Like, is getting rid of this despot leader worth all of the starvation and famine and death of civilians that it entails?
Yeah, the scene where after Fade takes over and he's just like, well, we're gonna take one of our battleships and just park it outside of Siege and break it to the ground. That was really hard to watch.
Yeah, and I'm so glad that they did that. So, in the things that are different from the book, there are really not a lot.
No.
And you can't say that about a lot of books to movies. For series it's a little easier, but for books to movies, like, that's really odd. And I actually really like the way that they toyed with this timeline. Whereas in the books, the Siege Chamber being attacked was very late. This and being the catalyst which finally sends Paul south to confront, the his destiny essentially.
Yeah.
Um, like I loved that being like the catalyst. I thought that that was excellent, and I thought that it really propelled him forward in a way that I'm not sure that the things in the book that make it happen didn't quite. I mean, like, yes, they make sense, but they only make sense if you're in Paul's head thinking through all these things, experiencing the prescient memories and thought processes that he's experiencing, which is impossible to depict in a film.
Yeah. Yeah. In
I think that this scene is much better.
Yeah. Because in the books, one of the things that propels him is when the siege gets attacked, his child is dead. Um, and they don't build that up in this one at all, that Paul and Cheney are going to have the child, which I think is one of those things that they removed just because it was like, well, yes, this is important generally for the plot. Um, we can accomplish that with other means, and then can focus on the weird children in the next movie
Right. Yeah.
if
Yeah.
they even need to at all.
Yeah, and I think that like as far as like Dune like realists go and Frank Herbert's books themselves, like that child is never mentioned ever again, ever.
I don't think so, at least not with any kind of like meaning.
So like it's better to just like cut that out because I think that, when he wrote the initial Dune, I know that he had some ideas about where it was going to go, but I mean, I don't think that he had the full scope of it.
Yeah, that
Um
makes sense.
Yeah, so using a child in the book made sense, but it just doesn't make sense in the bigger picture of this. And also because they compress the timeline so that Jessica's child is not yet born by the end of the movie, um Paul also couldn't have a child, like that
Yeah,
wouldn't make any sense.
the
So
math doesn't work there.
no, it doesn't, unless Freeman children are born very quickly, or, Reverend Mother children take very long time. I'm not sure, but yeah, and I was happy with that because I do think that visually, um, the child Aaliyah does not quite work.
No, the fetus was very weird and off-putting throughout most of the movie.
But I liked the fetus. I liked that we had the idea that the child Aaliyah was alive and cognizant of everything going on.
It was very creepy, and
Yes.
I
I
think,
mean, it's supposed to be. She
yeah.
is an abomination.
Yeah, so I do think the line that the uh Grand Bene Gesserit, when she says abomination at the end, I'm just like, I don't think that's not really relevant here. We haven't announced Aaliyah's presence.
Well, and I think she was saying that about Paul. Like,
Yeah, but he's not an abomination.
yeah, that was the confusion because, like, I mean, does she think that Paul's an abomination?
It might be an abomination that he can use the voice.
Maybe, or that he can see, or that she knows that he has taken the water of life, and so he can see the past too.
Hmm.
And maybe that's what she's saying.
I do think in all of her rampant speculation about Aaliyah being in this movie, I don't think we hit the nail on the head anywhere close, because they, as their like older self, appears to Paul in a vision for like a second.
Yeah, but I mean, I think that that was enough.
Yes, that was enough to understand.
And I think that Anne Taylor-Joy as a adolescent to teenage Aaliyah will be spectacular.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah,
Whenever they get around to making it.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think that that casting, is perfect, and I think that she will be able to give the, impression of what that character should be, and that is somebody who's fully adult and fully aware in an adolescent's body.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, I do think Jessica steals the show.
Yeah, so tell us about your feelings on your new crush,
Oh,
the rhythm leader here.
look, she's very pretty. She's very powerful. She yells a lot. Um, Probably the best thing is that like while you're looking at both sides of the issue here, and then you see Jessica, and the whole time after she takes the water of life, she's just like, "Oh, we gotta do this jihad. Come on, we gotta do it." Like she is like paving the way. No matter what he does, she is paving the way for him to take control, and it is terrifying to watch. Um,
Yeah, she takes that programming and runs with it because I think that, and a lot of it has to do with all of the Reverend Mothers on the Freeman path, have that, the prophecies and the wishes and the hopes of, a different Arrakis because they aren't Bene Gesserit, they are a different breed of Reverend Mother. So like that all gets caught up in there, but yeah, like her like manipulating everyone into that is so fascinating. And also they do a great job of showing Paul's distrust and disappointment with her in what she is doing.
yeah, it's such a contrast between the first movie where like she is scared of Paul when they're in that tent, and he's just like, you Benny Jesuit freak. And now I think she has the upper hand the entire time.
Yeah, and I think that, a lot of that is because now that she has drank the water of life, she understands what he means and what he's going through. But also absolutely she knows that he is the Lisan Al Gaib, that
Yeah,
he that person. This isn't because I think up until that moment, she always thought that he could be and that, maybe he might be, but after that point, she fully believes that he is this.
yeah. After being confronted with like the visions and memories of all the previous Reverend Mothers that like she descended from, you she knows all the plans. It's all
Yeah.
there. She has all the pieces, in a way more so than Paul does.
Hmm. Well, and she believes at that point, her Bene Gesserit training and I think the combination of her training and all of the memories really like pushes her over the edge in believing in Paul. And he doesn't believe in himself necessarily, and for multiple reasons. I mean, does he not want to become this? Absolutely. Does he not want this jihad to happen? Absolutely. So he refuses to believe himself. Um, you know, in and he's very humble, as Stilgar says.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
we also have to take a moment to applaud everyone who worked on making costumes for this.
Oh my God, these hats, these hats, these hats. Okay, Erie Lens hats, real dumb. Real
Yes,
dumb. That person should get fired. But the Reverend Mother costumes, holy shit.
yeah. There's a scene where there are a bunch of them towards the end, and I'm just like, this is amazing. This is cinema. This is art.
So good. How they move and how they walk around and how they have that presence and all their attendants. It was very much like, remember the scene in the first movie when she gets off of the spaceship and she's wearing all the flowing robes with
Yeah,
the like metal on her like the chains on her face. It's so similar. Um and beautiful and so detailed. Like when they were in that temple, like just all the costumes of the Fremen's like ceremonial robes in that temple were just incredible.
Yeah, I loved all the costumes. In a way, unlike any other kind of sci-fi, this is the future. This is so much better than the military uniforms the Atreides were wearing in the first one. Like just forget about all that. Like,
Yeah, yeah. I mean, these costumes were so good, and it makes me really excited for Messiah because I think that we will see some even more exciting costumes. And do you remember, the first time watching episode 1 of Star Wars, the costumes that oh
Padme?
yeah, the Padme wears, like
Yeah,
they were so iconic and so interesting and new and different.
yeah. That's
And
how this feels.
yes, that is absolutely how this feels. And I am so glad that we were able to achieve something new in science fiction costuming because and that's the thing, like if you look at like Wheel of Time and The Witcher and Game of Thrones, if you put all of those like the dresses that the popular, princesses who are kind of in charge wear, and you put them on paper dolls, you could switch them around and no one would really know the difference.
Yeah.
Like yes, some of them are iconic, but really they all have the same cut, the same styling, the same colorings, and they none of them are wearing hats.
I'm I'm going to be so excited to see people because this movie is inspiring tons of people. I'm looking forward to seeing people making these costumes
Oh, absolutely.
and wearing them to conventions. No more of this. Everyone's going as a Star Wars. Everyone's going as a dude.
Yeah, I mean, I would make a Reverend Mother costume for sure. I mean, it is just so good.
There are
I
other char. Oh, sorry.
Oh, I was gonna say I just think they could have done better with Irulan's silly
Y-
costumes. I just think that they felt so silly.
Yeah, they did. In a similar way to, there's Caladan looks different, Giedi Prime looks different, and Arrakis looks different. I think they tried to make the Imperial Palace and all of its people look different and have like their own flavor, but I
Yeah,
just don't think they hit the nail on the head with what they were doing there.
right. Yeah. And I think that is kind of a product of the books not really giving us a good full picture of what House Carino's environment looked like.
Yeah,
And I think that and that's a product of it being very confusing because he's the Shaddam emperor, so that has like a very like Middle Eastern feeling to it. Her name is Irulan, which feels almost Chinese. So like, but then they describe her as this white woman with blonde hair. And I always felt that it just felt so it just didn't all work together the way that many of
yeah,
the other places and people in Dunes did. And I mean, that's me bringing my own, like, I don't want to say racial prejudices, but stereotypes, my own
yeah,
stereotypes.
yeah,
And I think that they could have done something there to make it its own thing. And I mean, it's clear that was very much an afterthought, especially when we compare it to, the world of this Salas Secundus, Giedi Prime, Caladan, and Arrakis were all so well thought out. It is disappointing that they didn't inject a little more into that place.
yeah. If that had a bit more of its own identity, I think that would have made those few characters really pop.
And the really sad thing is they could have just borrowed the one good thing from 1984's Dune, which was the Emperor's throne room.
Yes, that would not have looked out of place in this world.
No, we would have been like, oh yeah, cool. Yeah.
Yeah, that's where Christopher Walken sits.
Yeah, in this like Art Deco, like, yeah, absolutely. We could have all been behind that. but instead it's this weird, I don't even know. Like I can't conjure a picture of what it looked like.
We'll talk about that in a bit.
Okay.
But to round off some of our um, Fremen, Fedaykin, Arrakis, Atreides legions, we talked a bit about Stilgar, but I want to talk about Gurney Alec for a second. So I'm so glad he came back.
Really? Okay.
In the books, I think he's a great character to bring back to like help ground Paul a little bit and like push him to kind of get revenge and do those sorts of things. I think it's weird that him and Lady Jessica don't have a single conversation together.
I do too, especially because, well, but I think that there are reasons for that.
I
And it does simplify a lot of plot.
Yeah, it does. The reason I say this is because they are a pair in uh Dune Messiah. Like he is her bodyguard, goes wherever she goes.
Yeah. Well, and so remember in the book though, at this point, up until I about a while of Paul and him being back together, he thinks that Lady Jessica is the one who killed Leto.
Right. Yeah, that is a good point.
And so they, by not having them speak, they kind of remove that whole plot line and the whole like revenge and the confusion. I think that's the same reason why they got rid of the Futher Hawat plot too.
Yeah, they deleted some scenes that were filmed with him. And then another, which I speculate was Prince Fenring. I think they deleted his scenes too.
And that disappoints me because I kind of wanted that.
Yeah, a little bit, just a bit more flavor, a bit more talking, a more court intrigue. I felt like would have done these movies well because there's a lot of those scenes in the book that got cut uh, from the even
Right.
the
Well,
first
I
movie.
also think that the way that Fenring being married to Countess Fenring allowed her to be more, her character then becomes more part of this court intrigue situation instead of how she kind of came off as a prostitute for the Bene Gesserit.
Yeah, she just wanted a piece of Elvis. Yeah,
Yeah.
she was very powerful. She manipulated him very well,
Yes, and
and
they did an excellent job of showing that. But in the end, like it did feel, very much more of a prostitution situation than a court intrigue situation.
yeah, and one of the problems, or I guess this isn't like a problem. If you don't know Dune, going up to the conflict, you don't know who's going to come out on top. The Baron is vying for the throne. He's trying to put Fade up there. The Reverend Mother is like, we can't let the Messiah ascend. And as soon as they get the seed that can become the next Kwisatz Haderach, um, they have a chance, and it adds this like third line of there's still things going on. We don't know if our protagonist Paul is going to succeed or not.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's something that's kind of hard for us who are Dune, obsessed to really appreciate. And because a lot of the things that happen don't make sense in if you don't know what's going to happen. you know?
Yeah, you don't really know what their end goal is because even with the Kwisatz Haderach, you like they can't control him. They can't control Paul. They don't know if they can control the next one, I guess.
Yeah, and I think that's why, they look at Fade, who is obviously a terrible human being, um, because he is somehow biddable.
Biddable?
Biddable? Yeah, they can use him to do their bidding.
Oh, okay.
Whereas Paul is not gonna have any of it.
Yeah, they made a claim that like they can manipulate him with like humiliation and sex, which, fair.
Yeah, I mean, he is a human, but I think that's part of the key too, is that Paul is not a human. Like, yes, he's a human as far as passing the Gom Jabbar test, but no, he is not a human after a certain point.
Yeah, yeah,
He
he becomes
transcends
an
humanity.
abomination.
Yeah, he transcends humanity to become an abomination.
So we're getting very close to talking about like the throne room and the final confrontation. So do we want to finish off any thoughts we have about Stilgar before we get there?
So yeah, we kind of talked about him being a little bit of a comedic effect. I do think, him being that like I mean, so Paul is a lucky guy in that he is surrounded by strong father figures in his life. Like,
Yeah,
most people don't have any, strong father figures, and he has like four.
yeah, he's got like four dads.
Yeah, you know so being somebody who believes, almost, definitely to his own detriment in Paul, um like that's an interesting character, and I do think that they borrowed a lot of the Stilgar personality from the later Messiah and Children of Dune for this, because I think that in the book Stilgar is way more skeptical for a much longer time.
Yeah, that's very true. Um, there's something that the Shadow Mapes says in the first book or in the first movie that's like when you've lived waiting for the signs and knowing of the signs for so long, you don't know how you're going to react when you see them.
Yeah.
And I think that's how Stilgar feels when he enters the throne room in the first movies. He's going in there because he has heard people chanting Lisan Al Gaib, and he's like, I'm gonna see this guy. And one of the first things like Paul says in that room is like he 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 verifies that like the Harkonnens were going after them and killing them as uh and the Duke's not going to do that anymore. He speaks out of turn. And the first time I watched the movie, I didn't think anything about it, but when I watched it this time, before I saw Dune Part Two, I was like, that's going to mean something, isn't it? And Stilgar just over time is like, if I can teach him our ways and he absorbs it, then yes, he's who I think he is. And there's so much of that. And after he gets pretty badly hurt in the attack on Siege Tabor, you know he's putting everything he has left into this faith, and he's like, Paul, you will speak for me on the War Council.
Yeah, and then ultimately trying to give up his life to allow Paul to take over his tribe, and Paul, doing that very.
He doesn't want to kill his dad, so he's gonna do a speech that kills 61 billion.
Indeed, indeed.
I have to give so much credit to Timothy Chalamet for that, for his entire performance. Everybody that's in this does such a phenomenal job.
Yeah,
Uh,
there is great acting in this movie.
this is cinema.
It ain't Tremors 2.
Even in the theater, although nobody was like cheering or clapping until the credits, like you could feel there's like an energy in there. There are people doing the lean in, the like, you know,
Hmm.
feel things. The whole movie, I have a smile on my face, or like I'm like, no, I can't believe they're doing this. Like it's even knowing the story, it's such an engaging experience.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to get all sappy, but and I definitely did not have a smile on my face during most of this movie because, I knew how it was going to end, and I think basically from the point where, like, I don't know, at some point in between Paul deciding what he had to do and him doing it, I started crying.
Oh,
I
I
thought,
can understand.
yeah, because like, I think they just did such a great job of capturing that, like the resignation with the decision.
Yeah, you feel for him and everyone else when they board that worm out of Siege to Bor, and they're like, we are going south.
Yep. Yeah, and seeing the masses and yeah.
The one last thing I want to talk about, which I forgot to talk about with Gurney, is I always like these spice smugglers as a part of this story and then in Children of Dune, because they're people who mine spice on Arrakis under threat of the Fremen and of the Harkonnens or whoever's in charge, and it was fun to see the like ruined spice hauler that's being carried around by a kite that's moving them around, and all their costumes were very like ramshackle together, and Josh Brolin singing a song. It was so much like heart and immersion and like a lived in world and reality for him that he's damning himself to Arrakis in order to get all of the other Atreides back to Caladan.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and to ultimately get his revenge.
Yes. So one thing we speculated in rampant speculation is I said the arena fights were going to be in black and white because they were flashbacks, which makes sense with like, Oppenheimer and a lot of like black and white, like what it means. Um, and I was like, we're definitely going to see when Gurney Alec and the Beast Raban are like, fight and he gives him the scar. And then Gurney just tells us that, so we don't have to see it. And I'm like, okay. And then the most like unclimactic duel in this whole movie is he just like walks up during the siege and is just like Raban, and then they fight for like a second and it's over.
Yeah.
But that's the arc, and I think that fits into like a much wider theme, but like the revenge you want is not satisfying. Like the like Leto not believing in revenge, he would have been ashamed of what Gurney Alec did. Like these
Yeah.
are not the same characters that we knew in the last one.
Hmm. Yeah, and yeah, that bit about revenge is very important, and I think that it's the reason why Paul doesn't just kill everybody too, is because he knows that it wouldn't mean anything.
Yeah,
And
like you sometimes people say, well, why don't we just nuke something? And Paul has the Atreides family arsenal, and it's like that's of no use just nuking all of the innocents and then nuking the Harkonnens and this or that, because then the Lance Rad will never take him seriously. um
yeah, well, and I think, in the grand scheme of doing the nuking of the spice, I mean, that was actually an allusion to something that the God Emperor says, and has that threat of, well, if you ever mess with my spice, then I'll nuke it and nobody can have any.
yeah,
Um, and like at the same time, like Paul can never do that because it would undo so much.
yeah, and he says, yeah, I think he paraphrases, but he says very close to the line of, he who can destroy a thing has the control over it, and Chani's
Yes.
like, you mean
Absolutely.
you have control over it? um
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing that like when he says that, like it's like ooh, like yeah, we have yeah. But I think that the other missing link there is that no one other than Paul and maybe the Fremen who, studied with Leah Kynes, no one really appreciates where spice comes from.
Yeah, yeah, it's very much it's not happening in your backyard, so you don't notice it, which is another great social commentary. Like,
Mhm.
there's all this war being fought over spice. Well, shit, we've been fighting wars over resources since the dawn of man.
Yeah, but the connection between the spice and the worms is very much ignored by most.
Yeah, and I do have to say that that seeing the little worm and seeing how they got the water of life, I think that's what they called it.
Yeah.
That was intense. I didn't think they were going to do that.
Yeah, that was striking and like yeah, bless the little makers and their water, like
So
hmm.
I do have to say, and this is the very little bit of engineer that is inside of me. If you want to have water and you don't want it to evaporate, you shouldn't put it in rooms that are lit with natural light that looks like there's just a hole overhead. Like there were too many that was the one thing that kind of took me out is the Seaches didn't kind of look like what I thought they would in my head. Like
Right. Yeah. Well, I mean, so I don't remember, so I'll have to like go and see if we can find some pictures of it. But do you remember in The Mummy, where they have the room where they light with all the mirrors?
yeah, I think so.
Like that's how I'm just gonna pretend that room was lit. It was
Yeah.
lit with mirrors and skylights. It's fine.
Yeah, it just seems like right above the pool of water that they use for the uh you know ritual, that there's just a skylight, and I'm like, that water would not be there very long at all.
Yeah.
Um that because that's a huge thing in Fremen culture that they touch on a few times. But I was a bit disappointed in the early scene where like Stilgar didn't see Lady Jessica's tear as being like so impactful and so meaningful. But in the books, it was Paul's tears over killing Jonas, and people were like, "Oh, he
Yeah,
feels."
he gives water for the dead. Like, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and but then later, Johnny gives her tears to Paul, and that has the big like giving your water to someone moment that I think fulfills all of those like plot points.
Yeah.
So we can now talk about the Emperor of the Known Universe. I was very excited for Christopher Walken to be here.
Yes, I was too. Oh my gosh. Did you watch the video I sent you earlier?
Of the guy on TikTok explaining that he was in the Fat Boy Slim, and that was the song
Yes,
about
I
Dune.
because we've talked about the Fat Boy Slim song earlier at some point in the podcasting. In the
Yeah,
Dune, we have discussed that there is a song about Dune. I didn't realize that he was the person dancing in the music video.
I swear I explained this when I was making the Dunuary trailer because I use a clip of the song in there.
Uh,
Um,
well,
but
I wasn't paying any attention.
Well, but that's okay. I am, however, saddened because he's not in this movie very much at all.
No, he was not, and that really is too bad. I really wish that they would have done more with his character, and he did not say that the spice must flow, and that was disappointing.
Yeah, I wanted more like Christopher Walken-ness in this, but there wasn't any of like the whispers or the cadence, um, which is okay because this guy who's fallen into being the emperor of the known universe is being controlled by everyone else, so it's okay. Um,
Yeah, he has no autonomy whatsoever.
yeah,
This is everyone else's game to play with him, and that. that is the way the cookie crumbles. And I mean, like, does the same thing happen to Paul in the future? Maybe.
Yeah, a little bit. So what did you think of the throne room that they had put up in the big metal tent on Arrakis?
I just thought it felt very cold and dark.
Yeah, it was a weird place, but it felt very like we're going to hold court on another planet. This is what you bring along. This is what you pack.
I guess, yeah. It was different. As somebody who's been to, royal courts in tents before, it was not what I would have done.
So what you do is you park your spaceship in near orbit, and you're using the spaceship as tethers to pull up your tent. I think that was really cool.
Yes, that was very cool. Would I do that on a planet that has strong windstorms?
No, because it looked like the spaceship was catching on fire.
It did. Well, no, that was the shield.
Oh,
Yeah, I thought about that too. I was like, what the fuck? And then I
that
was like, what's the shield?
that
Okay.
that makes so much more sense.
Like not holding up in the storm. And I was like, oh, these weird red blobs are the shield. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, there was so little of the shield used in this that I had forgotten it, but it makes sense because the shield is a death sentence on Arrakis.
Right. And, like it won't hold up in a storm like that. Like, of course not.
So I really liked the throne room scenes
Yeah,
because
they were very good scenes.
the Baron comes out and he's like, "My lord, what are you doing here?" And they're just like, "Man, fuck this fat guy." And they break his floaty stuff. They disconnect his dialysis machine, and the Baron just tumbles to the ground. And there's an amazing shot where he looks up at the empty throne because Christopher Walken's cowering with the Sardukar, and you get this sense that like he wants to be able to climb up there and seize it. Like even though at that point it would just be like a status thing, like it doesn't mean anything, but he's not strong enough. And
Yeah.
that's something that is very clear. Not just that he's fat, but like mentally and physically and emotionally not strong enough to take the throne.
Yes. Oh my gosh. But and the yearning to do so. It's like you see him reaching for everything he's ever wanted and everything he's ever worked before, and he knows that he's never going to get it. And neither is Fade. Like he's prepared this place for Fade and he's not going to get it.
And because Raban's been like abandoned by the Baron, at least in this point in the story, and been demoralized and humiliated by Fade, he's just like, I'm saving myself. I'm leaving. Uh,
Yeah.
and it's this excellent thing because the first movie's all about the fall of House Atreides. The second movie's about the fall of House Harkonnen.
Yes, absolutely. More than the fall of House Carino.
Yeah, because they still exist because in the end Paul takes uh, him as his wife, and Christopher Walken just goes to Salusis Secundus to hang
Yeah,
out with his laser cats.
the throat singers and the blood rivers.
I have to reiterate how much I do like those scenes of the blood rivers and the sacrifice because that takes from like more South American customs of like sacrifice and ritual and especially the like architecture of the steps that almost look like the pyramids down there.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really good way to look at it. And it's too bad that they couldn't have pulled more from that for the yeah, for
But for
this.
the palace, that really just seemed like a garden. It was kind of lame.
Yeah.
So we get to a point where we have our big confrontation, and it is entirely narrated and seen through Zendaya's eyes. They do all the talking. Uh, every blow Paul takes and fighting against Fade, and Zendaya does an amazing job of not saying anything and communicating every emotion everyone is having all at once.
Yeah, and this was such a good fight. Like I remember like being like viscerally like because like even though I knew what was gonna happen, like it was still like a great combat to watch.
Yeah, and if you're not too familiar with the story, you saw Fade destroy a Atreides soldier. You've seen him go up against Fremen. He has a chance.
Yeah, and he's a crazy good dude. Like yeah. And you're still cheering for Paul at that point too,
Oh
because
yeah.
you still think he's the good guy. And in a room with Fade, he is the good guy, but in a room with other people, at this point, the tide is turning toward jihad.
Yeah. So the Landsrad, they all arrive and are like, well, we're upset. And Paul's like, I'm gonna nuke the spice fields. And they're like, well, let's see what happens. And they don't accept his rule. And that's it.
Yeah, he goes and kills them all.
Yeah. So I'm a bit disappointed that we didn't have Leah kill the Baron, but having Paul kill him was all right. That was fine.
Yeah, I think that in the grand scheme of things, like having Paul do it and saying those words, what that was great. I think that, having Aaliyah being born and being weird as a child, it would just be too much. And so I'm glad that they chose to take a different path.
Yeah, I do think it will matter if they did children because she gets influenced a lot by the Baron.
Yes, but
But
I mean, for now,
yeah, for now, this is fine. But I think out of any character in this whole movie, Chani is the one that is most changed from the book.
yes, I absolutely agree. And I mean, I don't particularly like the way that they leave it with Chani. The way that, at the very end when she's just going off into the desert and Paul is going off on the jihad without her. I don't like that. And I don't know how that's going to play out for Messiah, and I'm interested to see where that goes, obviously. Um but yeah, I mean, the acting was amazing. I think that, her being the support of Paul through it all, but she also pushes him to go south, even though he pushes back against the idea because he knows what it means. He knows what it's going to do to her. He knows what, how hard he's going to break her heart in doing any of this.
Yeah, as soon as he says to Christopher Walken, "I'm gonna take your daughter to be my wife," like the look on her face is total loss.
Yeah.
I really don't know where they're going to take her character in Messiah, because in a lot of Messiah, she is just doing spice and giving birth to children. So I think there's a lot of room for that character to grow and like have a better place. I don't know how they're going to reconcile it.
I don't either. And that's definitely what I came away thinking about at the end as I walked home from the movie theater.
But I think it works so well as the first movie starts out with, her narration and it's like, and by royal decree, the Harkonnens left. Who will our next oppressors be? And it's Paul. And at the end of that movie, saying the dumbest line in any of them, that this is only the beginning. And
Mhm.
then her riding a sandworm off into the sunset as it's all gone to hell. It is somehow so much worse than she envisioned.
Yeah. Yeah.
But that is Dune.
That is Dune.
And that is why we need Dune Messiah to explain to people with low media literacy how this is all very, very, very bad.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, we need Dune Messiah to clarify it. But I mean, I do think, this movie hit it so hard on the head of the assignment that yes, Paul and the Fremen are better than the Harkonnens and the Emperor and this, capitalism driven spy scheme. At the same time, they fall into the same traps. They are manipulated by religion, and ultimately they do something way worse
Yeah.
than what the Harkonnens were ever doing. Because the Harkonnens, for all their terribleness, like they might have been engaged in some petty wars and slavery and stuff like that, but they weren't, devastating worlds, at least that we know about. And
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I think maybe like talking more about the terrible things that the Harkonnens did, at some point would be cool. But yeah, so yeah. Yeah, it's all very interesting and yeah.
But that's
But
Dune Part Two.
yeah, that is Dune Part Two.
And I have great news for everyone. We got our action figures.
Oh dear Lord.
And Christopher Walken's action figure is awful.
Yeah, those all look really terrible.
These are not great action figures. However, I'm sure that because of the hype that this movie has announced, there will be much better quality action figures that cost hundreds of dollars a piece for you to buy and for all your nerd collectibles. Um,
Yeah, this is so bizarre. I mean, like the one the Gurney one it looks kind of like Russell Crowe?
it does look like Russell Crowe in Gladiator, yes.
Yeah.
The because I think that one in the middle, that's supposed to be Duncan, I think.
Oh,
Or is that Stilgar?
I don't know. Are there multiple polls?
Yes. The top left and the bottom middle, and then the one right above that.
Okay.
There are Pauls in a line. We got three in a row.
Well,
And I don't think the Harkonnens are white enough.
no, and Fade with his mouth open is dumb.
Yeah,
Yeah. I mean, Lego did a better job, so
Lego did do a better job. One more thing to mention. I watched the first movie before this one with one of my friends, and he I told him about the Lego, and he was like, "Oh, that's the guy from the Lego when the Baron came on," and I was like, "Yes, yes, it is." He got some hands-on experience with the Apple Vision Pro thing. Do you know what that is?
yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah. It's a VR headset, and he said he watched a bit of Dune on it while the rest of the environment was sand dunes. So he could walk around in sand dunes and watch Dune. And I was very jealous of all of this. But then I realized if I put one of those on, I'd probably immediately throw up.
Yeah, that sounds pretty bad.
Uh, so now that Tober is over, what did we learn?
Wow, we learned so much. We learned, I think fundamentally that the person who has control over a thing or the person who has the power to destroy a thing has absolute control over it.
Like we're seeing right now with Warner Brothers and their control over Dune, they could have destroyed it, but have instead elected to destroy Coyote versus Acme, the Scooby Doo movie, the Batgirl Woman movie, and I think I'm missing another. So let's all thank Warner Brothers for releasing this movie and generating them $182 million in opening weekend.
Incredible. What a weekend.
Yeah, and I saw a report that was like the only thing that didn't make it higher was we didn't have all the screens.
Yeah.
I'm excited to go see this one again. I have a bunch of friends who I think I'm gonna make see it, so I'll tag along with them. Seeing this movie in IMAX is an experience, and getting to see everybody else's reaction to it is amazing. It's insane how this has become so mainstream and has so much of acclaim. And it's fantastic because this is what movies are about. This is Lawrence of Arabia. This is Star Wars. This is cinema.
Yeah, one of my friends said that they thought that this was like the new Lord of the Rings. Like it was
Yes.
as big and important as Lord of the Rings to them, the sequels of Lord of the Rings. And I agree, and I feel like it really is that powerful. And I think that like Lord of the Rings has a lot of really good themes and stories and messaging about good versus evil, the power of friendship, the power of teamwork, the power of hope and dreams, and teaming together when all is hopeless, and pushing through against evil. Whereas Dune has much subtler messages, which I think are just as important to think about in our modern world. Lord of the Rings was based on Tolkien's experiences as a soldier in World War I, and this and Dune is very much based on the issues in the Middle East throughout the last century that just keep continuing long after Dune was written. The scarcity of resources, the distrust in politicians, the um, the harm that we cause in our environments, and the lack of care that we have for the world that we live in, um, are all such important themes. And I mean, they're small compared to the bigger themes of the dictators and the overlords that the Western world puts on a lot of cultures.
I think Dune is just as relevant now as it was 60 years ago when it was written. And that is amazing. And that's what makes it such a great story to tell now, especially on the big screen, but is also horrifying.
Yeah, we really have learned nothing, and the lessons of Dune are are often ignored. And I think that that's a big part of that, is that the messaging is subtle enough that people don't understand that Paul is not the good guy. And I think that this movie did a great job of hammering that home, in that in doing what he was doing was ultimately not the right path to doing good in the universe. I mean, it is the winning path, but winning is often paved with corpses.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we want to thank you all for sticking with us for the entirety of Dunuary now that it's concluded. It's now Darch.
Yeah, I was thinking about that earlier today, and I was like, ooh, we just got to keep saying January. We can't.
Yeah, Darch is even worse.
Yeah, Darts is awful. Like Tober, cool. January, pretty good. Darch, god awful.
But I've had an amazing time going through a history and a very wide range of cinema, talking with you about it, and seeing what is probably going to be the defining film of the year. I'm going to say, I'm going to make that claim.
Yeah, I definitely think it will be. And I mean, as at least the biggest blockbuster they'll be this year.
Oh
And
yeah.
and I hope that that's not just because it's a bad year for the writers strike and the actors strike, but more of because this is an incredible movie. So thank you for putting up with all of my weird Dune references all the time, but especially during Dunuary. And I look forward to subtly referencing Dune throughout our future podcasts that are not going to be specifically about Dune.
Yeah, and I look forward to talking about other movies, moving on to a different subject, and still be reminded that, you know, this is all of it built up to Dune.
Indeed, indeed.
Well, thank you everyone, and I hope you have a good night.
Yeah. See you next week.